The crisp morning air, usually a source of quiet contentment for Eleanor "Ellie" Vance, felt suddenly charged with an ominous chill as she plucked a stark white envelope from her mailbox. Unlike the usual junk mail or utility bills, this bore the crisp, formal logo of the Meadowbrook Homeowners Association, a typically benign entity that now, it seemed, held a sharp, unseen blade. Her fingers trembled slightly as she tore it open, her eyes scanning the official letterhead, then widening in disbelief as she read the terse, unforgiving lines. Immediate removal required eyesore structure, violation of community aesthetic guidelines, escalating fines, legal action. The words blurred, coalescing into a singular, infuriating demand. Tear down her shed. Her shed. A bitter, ironic laugh escaped her lips. To anyone else, it might have appeared as a quaint, sturdy structure nestled in the back corner of her meticulously kept yard, its cedar siding weathered to a gentle silver, its small windows catching the morning light. But to Ellie, it was more than just wood and nails. It was the beating heart of her passion, the quiet sanctuary where she transcended the mundane. This wasn't some neglected storage unit. It was her meticulously built, legally registered amateur ham radio station. Inside, a symphony of gleaming equipment, transceivers, amplifiers, and an array of blinking lights hummed with potential. Wires snaked across the ceiling leading to the slender, almost invisible antenna that stretched skyward, a silent conduit to conversations reaching across continents, a lifeline to distant voices, a personal portal to the world. For years, this station had been her solace, her challenge, her connection to a vibrant global community of fellow enthusiasts. She had meticulously planned its construction, ensuring it met all local codes and, crucially, was registered with the proper authorities, a fact she had assumed would grant her immunity from such petty grievances. The HOA's demand wasn't just an inconvenience, it was an assault on her very identity, a dismissal of a pursuit that had brought her immense joy and purpose. A fiery indignation began to simmer beneath her initial shock. They called it an eyesore? This hub of communication, this beacon of connection, a testament to her dedication and technical skill. This was more than just a property dispute. It was a battle for her freedom to engage in a hobby she cherished, a right she believed was unequivocally hers. As the morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across her eyesore shed, Ellie crumpled the HOA letter in her fist. The initial sting of disbelief gave way to a steely resolve. They wanted a fight? She was ready. The Meadowbrook HOA had just picked a battle with someone who understood not just the rules of their little community, but the very airwaves of freedom. The crumpled HOA letter lay on Eleanor's desk, a stark white challenge against the warm glow of her computer screen. Gone was the initial shock, replaced by a cold, methodical determination. If they wanted a fight, she would arm herself with facts, with laws, with irrefutable proof. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, not for casual chatter on the airwaves, but for a deep dive into the labyrinthine world of legal precedent and federal regulations. Her search began with the most crucial piece of legislation, PRB 1. She remembered snippets from ham radio forums, vague references to federal preemption, but now she needed the specifics, the exact wording, the case studies that had cemented its power. Page after page of legal jargon unfurled before her, but Ellie, with her engineer's mind, devoured it, translating legalese into actionable knowledge. She cross-referenced federal rulings with local zoning ordinances, meticulously comparing the Meadowbrook HOA's bylaws with the broader legal landscape. Every permit, every receipt, every piece of correspondence related to the construction and registration of her station was pulled from her meticulously organized files. She found the original building plans, signed and stamped by the county, detailing the dimensions and materials of her shed. She unearthed the FCC license for her amateur radio call sign, a document of federal authority that predated her move into Meadowbrook by years. Even the purchase records for her antenna, complete with specifications confirming its compliance with height restrictions and structural integrity, were added to her growing arsenal. This wasn't just about a hobby. It was about a federally recognized service, a vital communication link, and she was going to make sure the HOA understood that. Her first attempt at communication with the HOA board was a polite yet firm email. She attached copies of her FCC license, a summary of PRB1, and an invitation to discuss the matter amicably. The reply came 2 days later, a curt, templated response from the HOA secretary stating that all structures must comply with community aesthetic standards and reiterating the threat of fines. There was no acknowledgement of her legal points, no offer of dialogue, just a dismissive wave of the hand. It was as if they hadn't even read her carefully crafted explanation. A knot of frustration tightened in Ellie's stomach. This wasn't ignorance. This felt like arrogance, a deliberate disregard for her rights. She tried calling the HOA president, a man named Richard Sterling, whose voice, when she finally reached him, was clipped and condescending. "Ms. Vance," he'd said, his tone dripping with false patience, "we understand you have a hobby, but Meadowbrook is a premium community. We maintain certain standards. Your structure simply doesn't fit. We've been very clear." He hung up before she could even mention the FCC. The dismissiveness fueled her resolve. They saw her as a nuisance, an easily intimidated homeowner. They were wrong. It was during one of her late-night research sessions, cross-referencing local property deeds, that she stumbled upon an online forum for amateur radio operators facing HOA disputes. She posted her situation, detailing the Meadowbrook HOA's demands. Within hours, her inbox was flooded with responses. One, in particular, stood out. It was from a fellow ham operator, a seasoned veteran named Arthur "Art" Jenkins, whose call sign she recognized from distant nets. Art, it turned out, was not only a passionate ham, but also a retired attorney specializing in property law. He offered to review her documentation, free of charge, out of solidarity for a fellow operator. His initial assessment was a powerful affirmation. "Ellie," he'd said over a crackling phone line, his voice gruff but reassuring, "you've got a very strong case here. PRB1 is a powerful shield. They can't just arbitrarily demand you remove a federally licensed station." Art's words were like a fresh gust of wind through her sails. He advised her on how to formally respond, suggesting certified letters and meticulous record-keeping of all communication. He even offered to draft a formal legal notice, a cease and desist of sorts, to be sent to the HOA. This was her first real victory, a confirmation that she wasn't alone, and that her fight was grounded in solid legal ground. The tension, however, remained. Art warned her that HOAs often dug in their heels, relying on homeowner ignorance and the fear of legal costs. They might try to intimidate her, to drag out the process. But now, armed with knowledge and a newfound ally, Ellie felt a surge of confidence. The HOA might have been misinformed or worse, deliberately malicious, but they were about to learn that Eleanor Vance was not someone who would back down when her passion, her rights, and her freedom were on the line. She would fight, not just for her Jed, but for the principle of the airwaves of freedom. The community clubhouse meeting room, usually buzzing with the mundane chatter of potluck sign-ups and garden club announcements, was thick with an almost palpable tension as Eleanor Vance took her seat, her meticulously organized binder clutched firmly in her hands. The air was heavy, charged not just with the scent of stale coffee but with unspoken judgment. Faces, some familiar from casual waves across lawns, others entirely new, turned towards her as the HOA president, Richard Sterling, called the meeting to order, his gaze sweeping over the room with an air of self-importance that Ellie found increasingly irritating. He sat at the head of a long, polished table, flanked by the rest of the HOA board, Mrs. Henderson, whose pursed lips seemed permanently set in disapproval, and Mr. Davies, whose slumped posture suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. When her agenda item, Structural Compliance Review, Vance Property, was finally called, a hush fell over the room. Ellie rose, her voice steady despite the rapid thumping of her heart. "Good evening, Mr. Sterling, esteemed board members, and neighbors. My name is Eleanor Vance, and I'm here to address the recent notice regarding my amateur radio station." She paused, allowing the phrase amateur radio station to sink in, an attempt to reframe the shed narrative. She then calmly but firmly began her presentation, not with an apology, but with a statement of fact and law. My station, a crucial part of my federally licensed amateur radio operations, has been mistakenly identified as an eyesore structure, a claim I intend to refute with established legal precedent. She opened her binder, revealing neatly tabbed sections. Under federal law, specifically the FCC's PRB-1 ruling, state and local governments, including homeowners associations, are preempted from enacting ordinances that preclude amateur radio communications. This means, simply put, that while local authorities can regulate antenna structures for health, safety, and aesthetic purposes, they cannot impose regulations that effectively prevent amateur radio operations. Her voice, clear and resonant, filled the room, cutting through the initial murmurs. She cited specific case numbers, quoting sections of the ruling that affirmed the importance of amateur radio as a public service, especially in emergencies. She then presented photographs of her station, showing not a dilapidated shed, but a well-maintained, purpose-built structure, contrasting it with satellite images that demonstrated how minimally visible her antenna was from surrounding properties. My station is not only fully compliant with all county building codes, she continued, but its existence is protected by federal statute. I have here copies of my FCC license, my building permits, and an outline of PRB-1 for everyone to review. She offered to pass around copies, but Sterling waved a dismissive hand. "Thank you, Ms. Vance," Sterling interjected, his tone sharp, his smile thin and unconvincing. "We appreciate your detailed presentation. However, as the Meadowbrook HOA, our primary responsibility is to uphold the aesthetic integrity and property values of this community. While we respect your hobby, federal regulations do not override our community's right to maintain its standards." His words dripped with condescension. "Frankly, Miss Vance, federal regulations or not, that shed is an eyesore. It devalues the properties around it. We've received numerous complaints." Ellie's eyes narrowed. "With all due respect, Mr. Sterling, PRB-1 is not a suggestion. It's a federal preemption. It directly addresses the balance between local aesthetic concerns and the federal interest in amateur radio. And as for numerous complaints, I've received no formal grievances from any neighbor before your letter." A few heads in the audience turned, some curious, some nodding subtly in agreement with Ellie. A younger couple in the second row exchanged glances, their expressions suggesting sympathy. Old Mr. Henderson, a quiet ham operator himself whom Ellie had briefly spoken with, offered a small, encouraging nod from the back. But Mrs. Henderson shot him a glare, then turned her disapproving gaze back to Ellie. "Miss Vance," Sterling pressed on, ignoring her points, "the board has deliberated. We believe your structure falls outside the acceptable architectural guidelines. We are prepared to levy fines of $50 a day, starting next week, should the structure not be removed." His voice rose, tinged with a thinly veiled threat. "We will escalate to legal action if necessary. We are confident in our position." His arrogance was infuriating. He was not just stubborn, he was willfully ignorant, or perhaps deliberately malicious in his interpretation of the rules. Ellie felt a wave of frustration wash over her. She had laid out the facts, presented the law, and offered a reasonable path forward. Yet they refused to listen, preferring to cling to their narrow-minded view of aesthetics over federal law. "So, you are openly choosing to disregard federal preemption and pursue action against a legally protected amateur radio station?" Ellie asked, her voice now edged with a cold precision that matched Sterling's own. He merely folded his arms, a smug look on his face. "We are choosing to protect our community standards, Ms. Vance." The meeting concluded shortly after, with the HOA board unwavering in their stance. Ellie walked out of the clubhouse, the cold night air a sharp contrast to the heated exchange. The amicable options were exhausted. The battle was far from over. It had just escalated, and Ellie knew, with a surge of renewed determination, that she would have to fight even harder. This was no longer just about her shed. It was about standing up to a bullying authority, a fight she was now more resolute than ever to win. The echo of Richard Sterling's dismissive tone lingered in Eleanor's ears long after the contentious HOA meeting. The board's unwavering arrogance, their blatant disregard for federal law, had solidified her resolve. Amicable options were truly exhausted. If they wouldn't listen to reason and legal precedent in a private meeting, she would ensure their actions were illuminated by a much broader spotlight. Her first move was to tap into the very network her eyesore station allowed her to access, the amateur radio community. She crafted a concise, powerful summary of her ordeal, detailing the HOA's demands, her legal counter-arguments citing PRB-1 and their subsequent refusal to acknowledge federal preemption. She posted it on national ham radio forums, shared it with local clubs, and even sent it to the American Radio Relay League, ARRL, the National Association for Amateur Radio in the USA, known for supporting operators in such disputes. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Her inbox became a torrent of solidarity, advice, and offers of assistance. Seasoned operators recounted their own battles with HOAs, offering strategies and moral support. Legal aid volunteers, many of them hams themselves, reached out, offering pro bono advice and connections to attorneys specializing in property rights and FCC regulations. One particularly helpful email came from a retired judge in a neighboring state who provided a detailed roadmap for escalating the dispute, emphasizing the importance of a formal legal demand letter drafted by an attorney. This surge of support was a powerful antidote to the isolation she had felt in the HOA meeting. She wasn't just fighting for her shed, but for the rights of countless others. Beyond the ham radio community, Ellie began to subtly engage her immediate neighbors. She printed out simplified summaries of PRB-1 and the FCC's stance, leaving them discreetly with a few trusted individuals she knew were sympathetic or at least open-minded. She struck up conversations while walking her dog, casually mentioning the HOA's stance and the federal laws protecting her station. To her surprise, some neighbors who had remained silent during the meeting began to approach her privately. Mrs. Gable, a quiet elderly woman from 2 doors down, confessed she had always admired Ellie's dedication and found the shed perfectly charming. Mr. Chen, a meticulous gardener, admitted he thought the HOA was getting a bit too big for their britches, and offered to sign any petition. Even a few younger residents, initially swayed by the HOA's rhetoric, expressed concern when they understood the implications of federal preemption and the potential for the HOA to overstep its bounds. Her story began to ripple through Meadowbrook, not as a complaint, but as a cautionary tale of overzealous authority. Meanwhile, the HOA, seemingly emboldened by their perceived victory at the meeting, escalated their tactics. The daily fines began to appear on her statements, accompanied by increasingly aggressive letters threatening liens on her property. Rumors, undoubtedly spread by Sterling and Mrs. Henderson, began to circulate about Ellie being difficult and uncooperative, attempts to ostracize her within the community. She found her name conspicuously absent from community event invitations, and some neighbors who had initially been friendly now avoided eye contact. It was a classic intimidation play, designed to wear her down, to make her feel isolated and overwhelmed. But with each new threat, with each whispered slight, Ellie felt her resolve harden further. She meticulously documented every fine, every letter, every instance of attempted social exclusion, building a comprehensive record for the inevitable legal confrontation. The preliminary query to a local news station, initially a long shot, yielded a surprising response. A junior reporter, intrigued by the David vs. Goliath narrative and the federal law angle, expressed interest in a potential story, though he cautioned that it was early stages. This was a glimmer of hope, a potential amplifier for her voice beyond the confines of Meadowbrook. The ARRL, true to their mission, connected her with a pro bono legal team specializing in amateur radio defense. Their initial assessment mirrored Art Jenkins's, a strong case, but one that would require a formal legal challenge to force the HOA's hand. The anticipation for this next major step was palpable. Ellie spent hours on the phone with the legal team, discussing strategy, reviewing evidence, and preparing for the formal legal notice that would soon land on the HOA's doorstep. She knew this would be a significant escalation, a point of no return. But she also knew it was necessary. The weight of the community's growing expectations, the quiet nods of support from neighbors, the encouraging messages from fellow hams across the country. It all pressed down on her, but also lifted her. This wasn't just her fight anymore. It was a stand for a principle, a defense of a federally recognized right against local tyranny. As the legal team finalized the demand letter, a renewed sense of hope surged through Ellie. The battle was far from over, but she was no longer alone, and the airwaves, once threatened, now hummed with the collective strength of a community, rallying behind her. The next move was hers, and it would be decisive. The day the formal legal notice landed on the Meadowbrook HOA's doorstep felt like the culmination of months of simmering tension, a quiet explosion that reverberated through the meticulously manicured lawns of the community. Eleanor had chosen to pursue a formal legal demand letter, drafted by the ARRL-provided legal team, a document that meticulously outlined the federal preemption of PRB1, detailed the HOA's violations, and threatened a lawsuit if they did not. Immediately cease their harassment and withdraw all fines. Ellie felt a knot of nervousness in her stomach as she imagined Richard Sterling's reaction, but beneath it, a surge of defiant triumph. This was it. The ball was now firmly in their court, and the stakes were higher than just her eyesore shed. The response from the HOA was not immediate. A tense silence hung over Meadowbrook for a full week, punctuated only by the continued, though now ignored, daily fine notices that arrived in Ellie's mailbox. Then a certified letter arrived, not from Sterling, but from the HOA's own legal counsel. It proposed a mediation session, a formal attempt to resolve the dispute outside of court. This was a significant shift, a tacit acknowledgement from the HOA that they recognized the gravity of Ellie's legal position. The mediation took place in a neutral conference room downtown, a sterile environment that did little to calm Ellie's racing pulse. She sat across a polished table from Richard Sterling and Mrs. Henderson, their faces grim and unyielding, flanked by their own attorney, a sharp-suited woman with a perpetually skeptical expression. Ellie had her legal team beside her, their quiet confidence a comforting anchor. The mediator, a calm, experienced professional, began by outlining the terms of the discussion. Ellie's attorney opened, reiterating the federal preemption of PRB1 and the FCC's long-standing support for amateur radio operations. He presented Ellie's meticulous documentation, her FCC license, building permits, and the extensive record of the HOA's escalating threats and fines. He highlighted the potential for significant legal costs for the HOA should the case proceed to federal court, emphasizing the clear precedent set by similar cases across the country. Sterling's attorney countered, attempting to argue that the shed was a unique aesthetic blight, that the HOA had a right to protect property values, and that PRB-1 offered flexibility for local regulations. But her arguments felt weak, easily dismantled by Ellie's legal team, who pointed out that aesthetic blight was subjective and that PRB-1 specifically limited local authority when it came to precluding amateur radio operations. As the mediation progressed, Ellie watched Sterling and Henderson's expressions shift. The initial arrogance began to crack, replaced by a grudging realization of their precarious position. The mediator, sensing the shift, gently but firmly guided them towards a resolution. He explained the high probability of a ruling against the HOA in federal court, the potential for them to be liable for Ellie's legal fees, and the negative publicity such a case would generate. The turning point came when Ellie herself spoke, not with legal jargon, but with genuine passion. "This isn't just about a shed," she stated, her voice clear and resonant. "It's about a fundamental right to communicate, a service that provides vital links in emergencies, a hobby that connects people across the globe. My station is a testament to innovation and connection, not an eyesore. You're not just fighting me, you're fighting a federal mandate and the very spirit of community." Her words, delivered with a quiet dignity, seemed to land with more impact than any legal brief. Sterling's face flushed, and Mrs. Henderson looked away, unable to meet Ellie's gaze. After a tense private caucus, the HOA's attorney returned, her shoulders slumped. "My clients," she announced, "are prepared to withdraw all demands for removal of Ms. Vance's structure and all levied fines. They will issue a formal apology and acknowledge the federal protections afforded to amateur radio operators." A wave of relief, profound and exhilarating, washed over Ellie. It was a clear, unequivocal victory. The triumph was not just hers. It was a victory for every amateur radio operator who had faced similar battles. Sterling, though visibly seething, managed a curt, almost inaudible, "Agreed." Mrs. Henderson simply nodded, her lips still pursed, but now with a hint of defeat, rather than disapproval. The formal agreement was drafted and signed, solidifying Ellie's right to operate her station freely and without harassment. The news spread quickly through Meadowbrook, amplified by the local news reporter who had been following the story, and now ran a feature piece titled "Ham Radio Operator Wins Battle Against HOA." The article detailed Ellie's steadfast fight, the federal law protecting her hobby, and the HOA's eventual capitulation. It was a public embarrassment for the HOA board, particularly for Richard Sterling, whose reputation for iron-fisted rule was now tarnished. In the aftermath, life in Meadowbrook slowly shifted. The daily fine notices ceased, replaced by a single, formal letter from the HOA acknowledging their error and withdrawing all previous demands. Neighbors who had previously avoided Ellie now approached her with smiles and words of congratulations. Mr. Henderson, the quiet ham operator, finally introduced himself properly, sharing stories of his own past HOA skirmishes and expressing his admiration for her courage. Ellie's shed was no longer an eyesore, but a symbol of resilience, a quiet monument to standing up for one's rights. She continued to operate her ham radio station with renewed vigor, the airwaves feeling truly free. She became a local advocate for amateur radio rights, frequently speaking at ham radio club meetings and offering advice to others facing similar HOA disputes. Her story, "The Airwaves of Freedom," became a rallying cry, inspiring countless individuals to understand and defend their passions against overreaching authority. The loop of her journey was satisfyingly complete. What began as a menacing letter threatening her beloved hobby had transformed into a powerful testament to the strength of federal law and the determination of an individual. Ellie's battle not only secured her own right to communicate, but also educated her community and set a crucial precedent, ensuring that the airwaves would remain free for all who sought to connect through them. Her shed, once a point of contention, now stood as a quiet beacon, humming with the promise of distant voices, a constant reminder that true freedom often requires a steadfast defense of one's deepest passions.